You're listening to episode 154 of the D6 Podcast.
I don't know anything more important in our society or in the kingdom of God than to help the church, help the family.
Discipleship is not an event, it's a way of life.
And one day it just hit me that discipleship at home was not about doing more. It was about inviting Christ into what we were already doing.
The goal of family ministry is not families sitting on the couch holding hands and singing Kumbaya. The ultimate goal is families that love God, love people, and make disciples of all peoples.
So that's why you're here. You're here to say 1 hour a week, as significant and as awesome as it is, we know that it's not enough and we want to be intentional with every hour.
You're listening to the D6 Podcast. Here's your hosts, Ron Hunter and Jeremy Lee.
This is the family ministry podcast that helps you connect church and home. And Ron,
yes,
spring is in the air, my friend.
It is indeed. I
The
love
birds are
this time
chirping.
of the year.
The flowers are blooming.
And where are you going with this?
No, I just love spring. It's a beautiful time of year. It's in Tennessee. It's like our best weather of the year.
Right.
Because summer is coming with scorching heat. Where I like to hibernate in my house for 3 months.
There is, and literally the spring and fall. I don't know. You might have an argument from me on a normal fall foliage year. I love the fall, and I think it's a little cooler in the fall, and so I love cold weather. Don't like freezing cold weather. I like cooler weather. Mm-hmm. But then the spring, there are certain trees in Tennessee that it's a wow factor when you ride through and see them.
Yes.
Matter of fact, we're planting trees right now in our yard. We've purchased 4 acres and house out away from town, and there's not a single tree on the property. My wife and I are changing that right now. We're planting. So yeah, I'm
and to
with
our
you.
friends that live in the north and in the areas where they've just been battling winter for months, this is their reprieve.
Maybe I'm not even sure they've gotten there yet. If they're in the far north, they're still in the thick of it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, it ain't that way in Tennessee,
No,
baby. We're feeling good.
We are. So come join us.
Come down
join
for
us.
a visit. And you know, Ron, there is another fun thing about spring.
What's that?
Well, this is the time of year where, Mother's Day and Father's Day, those are 2 of my favorite holidays because...
You mean one of them?
Well, no, I loved celebrating my wife as the mother of my children, and I love celebrating my mom. Happy Mother's Day, Mom.
That's right.
But, Father's Day is the best. We'll talk about it probably as we get closer, but that's when my only thing I say is I just want to take a nap all day long. Everybody leave me alone.
That's a winning
That's my
day.
gift to myself.
A great meal and a nap is a winning day, isn't it?
There you go.
Yeah.
And that's usually my wife wants a great meal on Mother's Day, so I know I'm going to eat good.
So do you guys go out on Mother's Day, or do you stay in?
Nope. We are. My wife is an introverted person, so for her, bringing the food on to the house is the way to do it. And now the way to do Mother's Day also is, ever since I was a kid, you go to church, and they pass something out to all the moms.
Yep.
And then they always, at least in my church, they would find out who's the oldest mom, who's been the mom the longest, and they do that
youngest
little
mom.
game.
Yep.
And I don't know if your church does that, but hey, here's what you don't want to do. You don't want to let moms come empty-handed to your church. You want to put something in their hand.
That's right.
And I'm shamelessly transitioning to what you have to offer, folks.
Absolutely.
But it's a cool. You guys have something to fit every budget, because if they can only afford the bookmarks, you got that. If they can do a little bit more, you've got a neat little printed guide. So tell them more about that.
One of the easiest ones to do is grab our bookmarks, and we have them for both moms and dads, but the one for moms, you can put them in their hands for as little as 79 cents a piece, and almost every church budget can afford that, depending on how many you're getting. If you want one, they're like $1.19, but they go down on a sliding scale based on what you need. And they have the Deuteronomy 6 passage on it, which is that reminder of the Shema, that generational side of moms pour into your kids the way your parents have poured into you. And then the second item that we have is the legacy books. Get moms a legacy book. It's got our pull quotes from some of our best authors on parenting, and we extract a quote in there, so it's a challenging quote. It's inspirational. It's affirming.
It's not a big book. It's a booklet that you can just scroll through for encouragement.
Every page has one quote on it. I mean, we're talking 20 or 30 words max.
Kind of a graphic
Yeah,
design, beautiful.
that's right.
It's meant to be pretty and
That's right.
reflective.
We think it's a great one to just put somewhere where you can pick it up and read one page out of it. Maybe while you're brushing your teeth, maybe when you complete your drive to work, just open up that book before you walk in, or maybe when you get home, just before you walk in and engage the family at night. That would be the one. And something I challenged our kids last week. We have devotional study guides, and I will tell you that when you think about, go back to Gary Chapman and the 5 love languages. Sometimes it's giving people gifts. Sometimes it's quality time. Sometimes it's physical touch, and on we can go. Words of affirmation, so forth. But for quality time, that is a big portion of the population. One of the items that your mom most wants is quality time around quality conversation. So kids, I would challenge you, or if you're a ministry leader, ask your kids to give this to the parents. Say, hey, will you commit to doing a devotional study guide that has the same theme, same readings as mom and dad? Give the issue to your mom, and you keep the age-appropriate issue for yourself and say, Mom, I want to do this with you for the next 3 months through the summer, and we just have conversations around our devotions through the summer. And if you want to know about those, you can go to d6family.com. Look for devotional study guides or devotional magazines, or call our 800 number at 800-877-7030 and say, hey, I want a devotional magazine for our moms and for the age of our kids.
And a reminder, Father's Day, the one that I really love, is June 16th. And you guys will have bookmarks and booklets for Father's Day as well if they want to go ahead and get that.
Exactly right.
All right. So, hey, today we last week you interviewed Dannah Gresh, did such a great job, and
we needed more time,
and it ran out of time. So
yes.
we put a part 2 together.
That's
for
right.
This week. And
so if you didn't hear last week, again, we'd say maybe pause, go back and hear it. It's a good setup coming into this one. And if you didn't hear last week, you won't have missed. I mean, this is self-contained. We're going to go in even a little bit deeper on the area of lies that girls believe. Dannah has been ministering as, probably most known for the Secret Keeper girl, helping keep our young girls pure, thinking the right areas, affirming them, developing them into young ladies, and all that the world's culture hits them with in such a harsh way, so anti-Christ, so anti-moralistic, and she's going to help us, because I would hate to think I was starting over with a daughter today, Jeremy, to be honest with you. It would be very scary, and I'm glad we have people out there like Dannah.
And in our second interview, the new guy, David Jones, our new team member, he's bringing to us Jason Romano, who will be talking to us on the subject of forgiveness.
So we have 2 very good interviews, and we're looking forward to both of these.
So after the break, we're going to continue our conversation with the one and only Miss Dannah Gresh. So enjoy the break, and we'll see you on the other side with Dannah Gresh talking more about the lies girls believe.
D6 Curriculum is a comprehensive discipleship strategy for all ages in your church. Solid biblical content teaches wise decision-making, and the curriculum emphasizes a biblical worldview. Each quarter of D6 Curriculum contains 3 studies, 1 Old Testament, 1 New Testament, and 1 special topic study addressing cultural issues, apologetics, and Christian living. D6 is great for use in life group, small group, or Sunday school. D6 Curriculum is affordable and easy to use. You can order teaching materials in print or digital format. See how D6 Curriculum gets every age on the same page at d6family.com.
We're back with Dannah Gresh, and if you missed last week's podcast, you need to go back and pick that up, because we are talking specifically to moms about the lies that their tween and teen girls believe, and we had some real insight there based on some research that Dannah Gresh has done. I want to introduce her, bring her into this, and today we're going to focus on the girls, but Dannah, again, is one of those leaders that takes us to places that are awkward for some people, but we need not avoid those conversations. She's the best-selling author, speaker, and creator of Secret Keeper Girl. She has been featured on a number of national media outlets such as CNN, Fox News, the 700 Club. She's a frequent guest on Focus on the Family and Family Life. She has an incredible TED Talk. She's most known for And the Bride Wore White, but she has authored 27 books, and her latest books I'm holding in my hand right now, and they are a work of art and brilliant with content for raising tween and teen girls. The title is Lies Girls Believe and the Truth That Sets Them Free. And there's a companion guide for moms. It says A Mom's Guide to the Lies Girls Believe and the Truth That Sets Them Free. And I'm going to tell you, if you're listening, I wished I had a camera, could hold them up, and you could see the beauty of the design, the full color look that it has going on. And literally is a phenomenal set of books that you must have not in your library, but on your bedside table and interacting with your teen and tween daughter. Dannah, welcome to the D6 podcast.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me back, Ron.
Absolutely. We started last week and we talked about, I'm going to give the questions. We're not going to answer them, but I want our listeners to know, so they'll go back and hear it as well. What are the important questions that moms should be asking themselves when it comes to raising their daughters? What are some of the lies that girls believe? And what are the common phrases that moms may unintentionally say to their daughter that have a negative impact? You need to go back and hear Dannah's insight, her expertise on this. But Dannah, we're going to jump into this one today because we have longer time and I can't wait. Let me ask you the first one. This is the title of the book. What's the biggest lie about God that a young girl has confided to you? And what was your response? These are the lies girls believe. So what's that biggest lie? We want to know.
Well, I think the most alarming was when we asked girls, "Are you a Christian?" A good percentage of them said that yes, they were. So we asked those that said yes, what does that mean? How did you become a Christian? 22% verbalized what is clearly not a correct answer. And I thought, wow, they're very, very confident that they're Christians, but they said things like, I'm a Christian because I go to church. I'm a Christian because my mom and dad are. I'm a Christian because I've always been one. I was born this way. And they weren't really able to understand or verbalize that they had sinned, that Jesus died for them, that they needed to choose to surrender their life to Christ. And so if I were a mom listening to this right now, and I had a daughter between the ages of 8 and 12, and I wasn't sure that she was sure she had made a decision to follow Christ, I'd run to her and I would ask her, are you a Christian? Okay, well, what does that mean? Just to clarify, I don't think anybody is feeding them that lie intentionally, but it's obviously a very dangerous one.
Yes. So if they are verbalizing that incorrectly, moms can either take that opportunity to lead their daughter to Christ or get a ministry leader to assist them in that. And it is kind of frightening, and maybe we should come back and deal with this on another time, but maybe you have some quick advice for how does a mom walk their daughter through finding Christ and accepting them and surrendering and becoming a Christ follower?
You know, I thought of that when I was writing the book, so I made sure to include in the Mom's Guide some real clear coaching tips. Even in a girl's book, if she ends up reading the book and doesn't have a coach like a mom to walk her through it. But it's really important that she first understands that sin separates her from God, that God is holy and that he can't be near sin. He didn't want sin to be in this world, but he gave us free choice. You know, he gave that tree in the Garden of Eden. He could have built a moat around it so we couldn't get to it. He could have caused it not to blossom so it didn't fruit. But he didn't want to have a human race of robots or puppets. He wanted heartfelt love relationships with us. And so he's given us that free choice, and sometimes we choose sin. And that separates us from God. But Jesus died, for God so loved the world, he gave his only son. Whoever believes in him won't perish but have eternal life. I think if your daughter can understand those two things and you say, would you like to surrender your heart to Christ? I am eager to see children make decisions to follow the Lord. The research tells us if they don't make that decision by their 14th birthday, the odds are stacked pretty hard against it. So have those conversations with your kids. They're capable of deep spiritual meat, which is part of what D6 is all about, is that
Yes.
children are capable of spiritual formation.
Absolutely, and we believe in starting that at the earliest of age of teaching, and there's not an age too young to start learning. Dannah, your book, I want to share with our audience, is not just one person's opinion, even though hands down, I think everybody recognizes you as an expert. But you did a survey, and you talked about this in our last podcast. You surveyed 1,500 girls and helped arrive at the conclusions that you're at over how to address this from truth, capital T. So let's jump into a cultural aspect of having, surveyed the girls. We're seeing things happen in our culture. So when we look around and see the role that social media is playing, and it's a negative role in shaping a young girl's understanding of worth, of their self-confidence, if there were to be a positive dimension to this influence, how might awareness of the effects of social media help a girl develop her sense of true beauty and self-acceptance?
Well, I think it's really important that moms take time to just take the mask off of social media. We know that the average teenage girl is going to spend about 9 hours a day in front of her screen.
9 hours. I want our audience to really grasp that. It may
Yes.
not even surprise us, but 9 hours seems a little higher than what I would have expected.
Yeah, that's for the average teen girl. And so we don't have good stats on tweens, but sadly, I did do some research and found that an alarming number of them, about 42% at the age of 12, had a smartphone with social media access, with internet access. So I think they're not, depending on the age, the 8 to 12-year-olds are not too far behind in the number of hours they're being exposed to untruthfulness. Now, one of the things that was really alarming to me, Ron, as I was doing the research, is that there's this spike in anxiety that I mentioned on last week's podcast among tween girls aged 7 to 17. We can trace that back to the year 2006, which is the year that Facebook made its big splash on the mainstream world, and followed very quickly by things like MySpace and Twitter, and now we're in Instagram world and Snapchat world and all manner of social media. It seems there is a direct correlation between the girls being exposed to all of those messages, whether it's just their friends, seeing their friends at parties that they didn't get invited to, seeing their friends picture perfect. They're not photoshopped, but there's all kinds of little apps that you can use to perfect your pores and your hair and your skin and change color. And they're comparing themselves to that, and they're believing that I'm not like that. I'm not beautiful. I'm not worth anything. I'm not invited to the party. Nobody wants me. I'm missing out. And so now you might say, Dannah, you're not answering my question. You're not getting to how can it be a good tool.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, I am. Because if you're a mom who's aware of how dangerous it can be, and you are your daughter's first friend on social media after the age of 12, because there's a congressional act that says before the age of 12, it's illegal to collect data and information for a girl to have a social media page, or a boy. Developmentally, they're not ready for that.
Right.
And so it should be after the age of 12, and you're their friend, and you're saying, hey, do you think she really looks like that? Do you think that she looks that good every day when she wakes up and she's like, come on, the celebrities that take their pictures, I'm not even out of bed yet. Come on, you've had makeup and hair done already.
Yes.
And you converse with them about the truth and the myth. Then it becomes a good tool because you get to show them the difference between a truth and a lie. And I think that's a very powerful thing for a parent.
I want our audience to really pick up on that. Converse with your teen. I am working right now on writing about the power of meaningful conversations, and Dannah has just nailed it. That's what Deuteronomy 6, that's the D6 message, is interacting with our kids, looking for teachable moments, continuing to build that relationship and expose the lies and reinforce what truth is all about. So Dannah, let's go a little further. Often the young girls are looking at social media for relationships, friendships, so to speak. They talk about how many people like this or follow that and so forth, and how many friends they have. What are some lies about friendship and truths to counter those lies as it relates to just finding good friends? The young girls, they believe as they are seeking out relationships to be, what are they looking for in all of that? Why are they trying to create these close and caring friendships?
Well, they're just looking for acceptance. And a lot of times they are, at this age, they're just entering into the years of homophilia. That's the official psychological term for cliques. And so they're starting to figure out, I'm different from some people. There's an awareness of the hierarchy of value that culture puts on things. And whether it's sports and performance or physical beauty, they are going to feel like they're comparing themselves and falling short. And so the lie they often believe, for girls anyway, is I don't have any friends. And they might even have one or two really sweet friends, but again, going back to social media, they'll see that girl that has 500 friends and followers on social media, and they only have 10. And that might be because mom is controlling it, and they're not even thinking through that. They're just comparing themselves to the numbers. And so we really decided that the lie isn't that you don't have as many friends as you'd like. The lie isn't that you don't need friends, because God created us to be social beings. I mean, that's why he created us. He wanted a friend. And so it's a good desire. It's a holy desire to have friendship. Where it's out of order is that we want to be accepted rather than accept. We want to be loved rather than love. And so we posit the truth that we all need faithful friends. And the best way to find one is to be one. And that kind of twists all that lying stuff in their hearts about friends into a truthful place. And we actually have 6 factors of true friendship in the book, versus the factors of being a frenemy, which is the term the girls use for when they have a friend who's not faithful. And a true friend loves all the time. They are loyal. They offer good advice to you, even when you don't want to hear it. They serve you. They focus on your needs, not their own, and they speak the truth, even if it risks the friendship. When those kinds of things start to show up in a girl's friendship, and she's aware if she is doing it or isn't doing it, she's walking in the right direction.
That is why you're the expert, and I get to ask you questions as you bring such insightful answers like this.
Oh, you're so sweet.
Dannah, I'm going to toss in one additional question. Looking
Okay.
at our time, I think we've got it here, and you're answering so concisely and so powerfully. You talk about 3 different stages of moral development in children, so that moms understand better what to emphasize as important to their daughter's growth during each phase. Can you walk us through these phases, please?
Oh, I'd love to. One of the reasons I explored these phases is because as I did focus groups with moms, one of the lies they believed was, it's too early to talk to my daughter about fill in the blank. And it was usually things like sex or gender, or sometimes I was alarmed to find that it was even spiritual things. They'd be like, if I talk to her about these spiritual things too soon, she might not really understand it and really make meaningful decisions, and it won't mean anything, and it'll disrupt her spiritual life her whole life long. So there was this lie inherent in many moms that she was going to mess things up if she talked about things too soon. But the phases of moral development tell us the little t truth, the factual truth about that lie. And that is, between the ages of, say, 3 and 6, our kids are copycats. They copy us. They want to be like us, and they believe what we believe. But between the ages of 7 and 12, they entered what I call the counseling phase. And I call it that because they're always saying, why? Why can't I have ice cream before dinner? Why does my friend next door have 2 dads? Why do I have to do my math homework? Why do I have to brush my teeth? And every single one of those questions I just asked is a spiritual question. They're asking why to decide if they believe it too. And if you explain, well, we don't eat dessert before dinner because God's word says that our body is his temple, and we have to keep our temple strong and healthy. So when we practice healthy habits, we're saying that our bodies are important, and that's why we don't eat that's a really important conversation. You might think, oh, just because I said so, or it's sugar and it makes you crazy. No, there's a much deeper reason to why we don't serve our kids brownies before green beans, right?
Yes.
So all of those questions are spiritual questions, and if we don't answer them, they become fatigued by our lack of answer, and they start to go to the world for their answers.
Yes.
And when you get down to why does my friend's mom, or why does my friend have two dads, or issues about gender and feminism and masculinity, you really want to be the one, and you want God's word to be forming what they believe.
Absolutely. As I think through this, I want to ask you an odd question I've often wondered about ourselves, and I've actually shared this in a talk. Do you think I'm in Generation X, and I grew up in an era where when we were asking our parents why, we were seeking to understand more than questioning authority. It sometimes came out of our mouths a little bit the wrong way, but we were seeking why. And the answer we got back was often because I said so, without helping us learn why we reach a certain decision. What impact do you think that's had on now? I've raised our kids. I mean, our kids are grown, but there's a group of adults who raise kids without the why. This seems to be what your teaching is about here. Is it not?
It's a bad way to answer a question. I write in the book about true virtue versus common virtue. And common virtue is, I'm going to do what's right because I don't want the consequences and I don't want to get in trouble, but I don't really believe it. True virtue is, I understand why I'm doing what I'm doing, and I'm doing it out of obedience and love for God. And when our children ask a question, no matter what the why question is, and all we say is because I told you to, then we are creating common virtue living. And when they're 21, 22, 23, what consequences are there other than society, which doesn't have many anymore, to motivate them to make right choices? They're gone. So when we take time, it's messy and it requires a lot of grace and patience to answer the whys, or even when our kids do something wrong and we discipline them, we explain why. Look at God's example in Genesis, where he doesn't come to Adam and Eve and say, just here's the consequences, you disobeyed. He asks them questions. What did you do? Okay, he knew what they did. Where are you? He knew they were hiding, and he knew why. He's conversing with them, helping them understand the why.
Right. That's so good. So we're talking about conversations. What are the key conversations a mom should be thinking of having with her tween?
All of them.
That's so true.
All of them. Because her whole brain is downloading truth right now. But to conclude about that conversation about the counseling phase, by the age of 13, pretty much everything she's going to believe is in there in some way, shape, or form. Now, she may grow in her theology and understanding of what she believes, but the research tells us that it's an anomaly for people to shift dramatically in their values, their moral values, and their spiritual beliefs after the age of 13 or 14. So take the time, be frustrated, be patient, answer the why, have the conversation.
Wow. So let's say that there's a parent listening right now and they've not done a really good job of diving in a little bit deeper and they're really nervous. Give them an easy place to begin, Dannah.
Well, an easy place to begin is to say, hey, you know what? I have been thinking, and I don't think we've talked about a lot of important things that I wish we'd have talked about. And I can write a list of some of the things I feel like we've missed. Maybe you could write a list of some of the questions you have that I've never talked to you about, and you're like, I wish my mom would talk to me about this. I wish my dad would talk to me about this. And we could start from there.
That's
Simple,
really good. So I'm going to twist that question around. A lot of times we have ministry leaders listening to this, and while they are parents and they continue to be better parents from the D6 podcast and reading books, the parents who they're ministering to don't always get that development. Tell me how you would suggest that a ministry leader coach the parents in their church to be actively conversing with their tween girls and teen girls the way you've advised them. How does a ministry leader influence that?
Well, I think Yeah, instead of having children's ministries, as D6 so nicely reframes things, we need to have family ministries because the scriptures teach us that God put spiritual formation responsibility in the hands of the parents, not the church. And so anytime we can be bringing parents to a place of being educated, maybe that's a weekly newsletter that just says, hey, here's what they learned in church. Here's some take-home conversations or some dinner time conversations you can have with your kids this week. Remember, you're driving their spiritual development. Keep reminding them of that. Maybe it's having a book of the month, or maybe it's having a seminar of the quarter. Each quarter you have a seminar on parenting and spiritual formation. But give them the tools, remind them constantly that they're in the driver's seat.
That's exactly right. We believe strongly in age-specific ministry, but your age-specific ministry should be not about doing 100% ministry, but helping those parents to continue what you start at church when they get home. So please listen to Dannah's advice. Let me tell you where you can get these books because they are incredible. You got to dive deep into them. I've had a chance to review them, and they are phenomenal. Again, Lies Girls Believe in the Truth That Sets Them Free, and A Mom's Guide to Lies Girls Believe in the Truth That Sets Them Free. You can find it at theliesbooks.com. That's lies plural, books plural.com, no space. And you can also find them on our website, d6family.com, in our bookstore section. And obviously, you can find everything at Amazon as well. So please go pick these up. This would be a fun interaction. It's one of those items that every time you can do something with your child, this provides that tool to converse, to interact with them. And as a result, Dannah and I will both guarantee your relationship will grow deeper with your tween girl and with your teen girl. Dannah, thank you for being with us today on the podcast. Any closing remarks that you want to share with moms out there who may be scared to death after hearing you?
No, we just covered some great content. And so just take whatever, don't be overwhelmed by it. Take whatever thing God spoke to you and said, hey, this is really where you need to start, and start there.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Dannah, for being with us.
My pleasure.
The D6 curriculum is based on the principles of Deuteronomy 6, to love God, love His Word, and teach your children to do the same. What if what happened at church also happened at home? Scripture teaches that parents are the primary disciplers of their children. Because of this, D6 curriculum believes in empowering parents to be spiritual champions of their children. It accomplishes this at church by having each member of the family learning the same biblical theme. This learning is multiplied once families leave church, and they continue to grow together through the week as they use their age-appropriate devotional study guides. Ministers only have 1 hour a week with students at church, but D6 curriculum helps students disciple their families during the other 167 hours. D6 doorposts are key principles that frame a biblical worldview. They are highlighted throughout the lesson, so when you leave home, you are thinking of Scripture, and then decisions of the day are based on the Bible. Likewise, D6 challenges students to carry what they learned in church with them into their week. D6 curriculum is a discipleship strategy that connects the church and home for every generation.
So I'm a great interview, by the way. Way to go! And here's my thing. You guys talked about this book, and books are books, right? Usually, you open them up and they are just filled with paper and words. But this book is gorgeous. I've got it in my hands. It's full color.
Yeah.
It's obviously designed in such a way that a girl would just connect with it instantly. And my goodness, what an amazing looking book.
As you heard from her, this book is designed to reach down to a lower age of girl than what they previously hit. And I can't imagine a girl not opening that up thinking this is fun. And
I can't imagine how much it costs to print this joker. It's like a magazine and a book.
And there's heft to it. You can feel the weight. It's not a big book. It's a small book.
Legit.
And here's the deal. Here's the moms. This is the
fun.
mom's guide.
There's
So
two versions.
mom has the book and the girls have the book. This is what Dannah referred to. This is something you should buy as a pair. And I'll tell you what, I know we talked about bookmarks and we talked about the legacy books, but I'm going to tell you what, there's a group of moms, a subset group of moms in your church that have middle school girls and younger girls. This is what I would be putting in the hands of every one of them.
And, if you want to know more about Dannah Gresh and her ministry, she has a website, dannahgresh.com. But these books, Lies Girls Believe, they are available at d6family.com. So that's real easy. You can go grab them there. And wow, I mean, seriously, these are beautiful. Gorgeous. Just go.
They have a picture of a candy apple on the front with
and that
little
makes me
sprinkles,
hungry.
with little sprinkles on the bottom of them. I know.
Yeah.
Now, I will confess, I got a chance to endorse one of these books.
You
and as a
did.
thank you, she sent me a copy of the books and a real candied apple with the sprinkles around the bottom.
Now, that's how you do that.
Isn't that classy?
Uh-huh.
She is a classy lady. She brings content, and she has great ability to make that relational with all ages.
Speaking of class, my friend, Jason Romano, I love this because I'm a huge sports fan. He's the host of the Sports Spectrum podcast.
Wow.
So you would think we're going to be talking about sports, but that is not what we're going to be talking about because he's also the author of a book called Live to Forgive because he had to live through a rocky relationship with an alcoholic father. And how many of us out there as ministry leaders helping families going through that particular situation? I mean, goodness gracious. And so he's going to kind of give us an inside look at how to deal with the forgiveness that comes with that kind of an intense scenario in our families. Not just alcoholism, but all of the traumatic stuff that's happening inside of families.
That's right.
We're about to get some inside tips on how to help forgiveness happen.
Forgiveness is transferable regardless of the transgression.
Oh, gracious. That was tweetable. I love that. Forgiveness
is transferable regardless of the transgression.
My goodness. Okay. Well, hey, let's just let that be our lead into our interview from David Jones on, he's talking to Jason Romano.
Joining me today on the D6 podcast is Jason Romano. If you don't know Jason, you need to know him. Jason spent 17 years at ESPN, and he's now the host of the Sports Spectrum podcast. And he's the author of Live to Forgive, Moving Forward When Those We Love Hurt Us. Jason, thanks so much for joining us today.
Dave, welcome. It's great to be here. Welcome back, I should say, because we've had conversations in the past. But I feel like I'm hosting for a second, so welcome back. But no, it's an honor to be on a podcast that I'm not hosting and actually get to be interviewed on. So thanks for having me.
Yeah, we're kind of flipping the script a little bit on this.
Yeah.
And today we're not talking about sports per se, but we're talking about forgiveness, which is the topic of your book. And we're talking about what it looks like when the people we love the most hurt us. Now, we've been friends for a while, but for the longest time, I knew you as Jason, the guy who works at ESPN, Jason, the guy who is always sharing his faith on Twitter, which those are great things. But I didn't really know your backstory, and I didn't know much about your relationship with your father. How would you describe the relationship you had with your dad when you were growing up?
I usually use one word when I share this. It was confusing. It was a confusing relationship because before I really started to be aware of the damage that he was doing to himself and to his family, growing up, I grew up, my parents divorced when I was 6. So being that was sort of a normal lifestyle for me as a kid, going to mom, staying with mom and living with mom and then going to see dad and my grandparents, his parents, on the weekends. So it was kind of normal. And as a young kid, I remember going to the bar with my dad, and he would, give me a quarter or 2 quarters and buy me a soda and put me at the pinball machine, and I'd just play pinball for a little while. And he would go at the bar and drink his, alcohol and usually get drunk and have his party time. But at 6, 7, 8 years old, that's a great experience for me because I don't know any better what's going on with my dad. I just know that I want to play pinball, which would be the equivalent, I guess, of video games now, and, give me, my soda. And that's the life of a kid. But as I got older, it got very confusing. And, our relationship basically it was weird. It was a love-hate relationship. It really was, because my love for sports and my desire to work in sports and even just to watch sports as a kid stems from him. he has that same passion for sports, that same desire. Even to this day, our conversations center around sports mostly. So we enjoyed having those mutual interests together. But then a lot of it came down to, his alcohol abuse, which was in its early stages in his 30s when I was a kid growing up. And, it always seemed to get in the way of our relationship as a kid. He was always, if I was playing a baseball game or playing a basketball game and he would come, it usually was, him inebriated, and it was always not a great experience. So it was a very confusing relationship, which I'm sure you and anyone else could understand when you have a kid who admires his dad and wants to have a dad who is there for you, but at the same time, the alcohol got in the way. And I always say that he was around my life and in my life, but he wasn't present in my life. And it usually stemmed back to the alcohol.
In the book, you mentioned that you began to question your worth as a son when you realized that your father actually chose alcohol over you. What was that agony like when you came to that realization?
It was hard. And it stemmed down to a moment in 1988-ish, somewhere in there. I was about 14. And it was the night before my dad and I were getting ready to go to Shea Stadium to see the Mets and the Cardinals in a baseball game. My dad is a big St. Louis Cardinals fan, and I'm a big Mets fan. And it was just going to be me and him. And it was this moment where him and I were going to bond together. It was a bus trip, so we didn't have to worry about driving or anything. We were going to go down to Shea, and we were going to watch, the Cardinals with Joaquin Andujar and Jack Clark against my Mets with Darryl Strawberry and Dwight Gooden. And it was just going to be a great day. And the night before we were supposed to go down to this game, my dad just came back home wasted. And we were at my grandparents', which is kind of the same place my dad was staying at the time. And, I was 14, 15 now. So I'm in high school and excited about this moment with my father, and he's wasted. And I didn't know what to do. I retreated, I guess, and I went into the bathroom of my grandparents in their downstairs area, and I shut the door and I locked it. And I locked myself in the bathroom for hours. And I can remember my dad and my grandparents both screaming, come on out, Jay, come on out. It's going to be okay. And I'm screaming and yelling and crying. I'm on the bathroom floor just weeping like, you couldn't even stay sober for your son. I can't believe you couldn't do this for me. It was very much a selfish act, which is what all teenagers are. And it was look what you had done to me. And it was really at that moment, at least as I think back now, that I realized that this man is choosing alcohol over his son. He knew that he had this amazing moment planned and we were going to go down and enjoy a baseball game together. And, he couldn't even for that stop drinking. And that really was hard for me to take. And I didn't know how to react. I hadn't had any sort of training on dealing with emotions and feelings, what teenager does, right? So I just retreated and I went to the anger and bitterness and wrath and really isolation by locking myself and putting this barrier in front of me and my father, which would be a great metaphor for much of the rest of our relationship for many, many years.
Yeah, and from reading your book, from getting to know you, I know that this is not something that just disappeared after the teen years were over. This is something that really went into your adult life. And I know it's something it's kind of a decision and things you have to deal with today. You talk in your book that there finally came a time when you were able to forgive your dad for everything. Was that because of a change in his life or because of a change that happened in your life?
It was, I guess, a little bit of a combination of both, but the change really was a process as opposed to an instant microwavable, thing that happened in my life. I became a follower of Christ in 2001, and that was Mother's Day. It's almost 18 years now. And thinking back to that moment, that's when my life just ultimately started to change. It began a process which still continues to this day of following God and really seeking him and having him be the most important thing in my life. And understanding, it took me a couple of years to really truly understand salvation, to understand the work of the cross, to understand who Jesus was, to understand relationship versus religion, and to understand forgiveness. So in my life, if you'd asked me 10 years ago, 12 years ago, about forgiveness, I would have said, yeah, I live forgiveness every single day because Jesus forgives us every single day. But I would have been lying or been calling myself a hypocrite looking back, because it was true in 99% of my life. With that 1%, my dad, well, it was not true. And I realized that my dad, as he continued to struggle into his mid to late, into his late 50s, that was still affecting me. And I had a lot of bitterness. I had a lot of anger. And every time that he would get drunk and call me, even, well into after my daughter was born, I would lash out at him and I'd scream at him and I'd yell at him. And then we'd end up hanging up on each other. And it was a bad experience. When he was sober, we got along fine. I felt like I had forgiven him every single time that I had allowed him back into my life. Like, that was forgiveness to me. But in Ephesians 4, it's clear. It says you have to let all bitterness and anger and wrath be put away from you. And then the second part of that is, forgiving as Christ forgave us, forgiving others as Christ forgave us. So I had not done that fully. And it really wasn't so it was a change in my life that took place, but it really wasn't until my dad was at his lowest moment in 2013 when he wanted to just not live anymore. And I really had to do a deep self-evaluation of my thoughts on my father, on my faith, and living out that faith and who I say, or who Christ says I am. I had to do an evaluation of the relationship that I had with him and what he was going through. So suddenly I started to develop empathy for this man who had lived a very broken life for a good majority of his entire time being on earth. And I was really, I had to come to a point in his lowest moment where I had to forgive him. He needed to hear it, but I needed to do it, if that makes sense. And I'm the one that needed to forgive him because I was keeping myself in a lot of bondage and a lot of pain and a lot of this sort of metaphorical chains that were keeping me bound up every time I was think about my father. So I chose to forgive him for me, not based upon what he had done or had gotten better on, or, whether he had done a nice thing or a good thing or a bad thing. I didn't forgive him for him. I forgave him for myself. But I also know that he needed to hear that from me. And so that really stemmed to a conversation we had where I actually audibly said to him, I forgive you for all that you've done. I release you from that. And I'm not going to worry about what happened in the past. I'm trying to move forward here. So
you mentioned how this kind of carried into when you had your daughter. I know it affected your marriage. It's affected, having when you've had children. And you talk in your book about boundaries. Boundaries are one aspect of forgiveness that we often neglect. We kind of end things at forgiveness and forget that we actually do need to put other structures in place. Why are boundaries so necessary?
Yeah, I mean, for me, the boundaries really were set up in the midst of my strained relationship with my father. I put boundaries up especially once my daughter was born, but even after I got married and bringing my wife into this, world with my father, I had to set up boundaries. So the boundaries were fairly simple. I just, I would either cut him off and not have any communication with him, or, not answer the phone. I even had to teach my 3 or 4-year-old daughter, because most kids that age, when they hear the phone ring, at least back then, the phones are different now, but when they hear those home phone ringtones, they run to the phone, want to grab it and just be cute little kids saying hello and want to talk to whoever's on the other line. I had to train my daughter to look at the phone, and if she saw Papa Joe or Joe Romano or his phone number, to not answer it. And that's always makes me sad to have to say that out loud, but it was basically the situation we were in. So I had to create boundaries in my life from my dad. After you forgive, it's an interesting question, Dave, because in speaking over this last year on this topic and been going to different places and hearing other people's stories, some people have been hurt so terribly bad in their lives, or have somebody close to them get hurt, and they're really struggling with forgiveness. I've talked to many people who have been in broken relationships, abusive relationships, many women who've had their ex-husbands abusing them, and they'll ask me, well, how can I forgive him, for all that? And I say, listen, remember that forgiveness is not about that person or what they did. It's for yourself. But that doesn't mean that A, it lets the person off the hook when you forgive them, and B, that boundaries aren't necessary in some cases. If you're in a really strained relationship and this person is is abusing you physically, mentally, verbally, whatever, you have to be able to set up some boundaries. And I think that's a very healthy thing to do. It's not a very sort of cowardly way, which some people might think. I think it's a very healthy thing to set up those boundaries in certain situations. Not everyone needs boundaries, in the forgiveness realm, but there's often times where you do.
That's really good. Well, Jason, I want to end on this question. There's no doubt in my mind that we have listeners who are hurting and they're struggling to forgive. As someone who's living this every day, what wisdom would you offer to our listeners who are struggling with forgiveness?
I would echo what I just said in the sense of remembering that forgiveness is not about the other person. Forgiveness is a process. It is not an instantaneous thing. It's actually, in many ways, like our relationship with God. It is a daily dying of self. It is forgiveness is a process that we never truly just do and say, and then it's over. Because people continue to still hurt us. So it is a process. It's always possible. And I say that only because that's what the Word of God says. And I remember, Jesus at the cross as he's, looking down on the people that put him up there. And he looks at them and he prays to God. And his prayer is what? He says, Father, forgive them, for they don't know what they're doing. So this man who's lived out betrayal, hate, anger, people, mocking him, spitting at him, scoffing him, is up on a cross about to die and looks down at the people who put him there and said, forgive them, Lord. Mm-hmm. So that's really what I always harken back to is what Jesus did on the cross. And so if he can do that, then I can forgive my dad for some of the little, pain that he caused me in my life. And everybody else can truly, if they want to, enter a place of forgiveness in their lives just because of the example that Jesus set. So really, that's what I point back to, Dave, is the cross. I think it's easier said than done because the human nature in us wants to be bitter, wants to be angry, doesn't want to let go, and the pain is very real. But healing is possible. And I think that's what healing is. Healing is not instantaneous either, right? Think about a cut on your arm or stitches. It takes a little time for that healing to take place. Man, our souls are just like that. Yeah. It takes time for our souls to heal. But I always think it's a great idea to do that with Jesus in your life and not without him, or without him is much worse. I think I don't know how I could ever have forgiven my dad without God's forgiveness on me every single day. So
that's really good and powerful. Well, Jason, thank you so much for joining us. Jason's book, Live to Forgive, is available now. You can follow Jason on Twitter at Jason Romano. And I do want to mention something else. If you have kids in your home who are addicted to sports, or maybe it's even your spouse, make sure they know about the Sports Spectrum podcast. I know it's a little weird for one podcast to recommend another podcast, but if you're already listening to us, you're already subscribed, then we're good. But I want to mention this because Jason does a tremendous job with the podcast. And what I love is that no matter who he interviews, Jason and every guest point to Jesus. And I think that's something we need today. So Jason, thank you so much for the podcast that you're doing. Thank you so much for your book. And thank you so much for joining us today.
It's an honor, Dave. Thanks for asking, and I appreciate you.
Our thanks to David Jones and Jason. You will probably want to go out and check out the Sports Spectrum podcast, where he really focuses in on the intersection of sports and faith. Thank you for your vulnerability, Jason, and sharing this. I know you have encouraged a lot of other people who are dealing with a lot of baggage.
I hope that's not the last time we hear from you, Jason. Come on back to the podcast again. Hey, thanks to David, thanks to Ron for their interviews today, and thanks to you for spending some time and hanging out with us at the D6 Podcast. Remember, on pretty much all of the social media channels, just hashtag D6 Podcast and shout out to us. We want to get to know you guys, learn about your ministry settings, and hear anything you might want to learn about on the podcast. We're always taking suggestions. Hey, you guys mean so much to us. That's not that's real talk.
That's right.
We truly appreciate
That's right.
you guys because you listen. Thank you so much.
Next week we have Dr. Rob Reno and
we're going to have Drew Dick with us, who is he works with Christianity Today. He is an author, and he's going to be talking to us about self-control when it comes to parenting and kind of how to be present and focused when we get back from our day of work and be able to give to our families, which is a need for all of us to listen to. So we're looking forward to next week.
It's one of those traits that honestly, when you're coaching your kids, you want them to find in your mate is discipline, self-control. Yeah.
That's what we have for you next week. I hope you're just as excited as we are, and we hope also that you have a great week of ministry.
You've been listening to the D6 Podcast. You can learn more about D6 at d6family.com.